Hello, guys. Today I want to talk a little bit about this novel by Junichiro Tanizaki, The Key. In this volume here, it's one of two novels that is combined into this one volume, but for this review here, I'll only talk about the first one, which is The Key. But firstly, just to give a bit of context about the author. So, Junichiro Tanizaki is one of the great modern Japanese authors that wrote in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. He is best known for his novel, The Makioka Sisters. And in the West, feel like he's very little known in general. And if he is known, then it is for the Makioka Sisters and not so much for any of his other works. I think that he is a brilliant writer, and I think that uh, a lot of his other works are worthwhile exploring. He is one of the Japanese authors that writes most beautifully and eloquently and with a lot of insight and sensitivity, especially around cultural identity, Japanese cultural identity, and the clash between sort of traditional Japanese norms and the rapid modernization and the rapid sort of move towards Western ideals that followed the Second World War. Just like Yukio Mishima, um, most of the Japanese literary elite or artists were, of course, very engaged in and focused on the situation in Japan after the Second World War and this big sort of shift that happened afterwards, where Japan both lost a lot of their national pride and a lot of their national identity. And the younger generations that grew up after that were much more inclined to look to the West for guidance, for values, for lifestyle, fashion, culture, and so on. The Makioka Sisters, in particular, is a very sensible and beautifully written uh, Bildungsroman or story around a Japanese family, exactly set around that time and exploring those thematics of cultural identity versus modern expectations of life. But Tanizaki was a complex human being. He is also known for writing um, stories that has a certain amount of eroticism, and he was also known as a womanizer and a great admirer of female beauty, and that comes through in a lot of his other works. And depending on how you feel about that as a reader, you do have to take into consideration that the stories and the novels are written, first of all, a long time ago, and they're also written in the context of Japanese culture, which has different norms and values, especially regarding consent, marital obligations, domestic roles, and so on. So, if you're very sensitive to that, perhaps skip Tanizaki as an author outside of the Makioka Sisters. But if you're not scared about that, then I think you will enjoy stories like The Key. The Key is more of an erotic or almost voyeuristic, fetishistic experience to read. It's a very short novel, it's 130 pages, and the form of the narrative is very interesting because the whole novel or short story, novella, whatever you want to call it, is basically diary entries. It's alternating diary entries from Ikuko and her husband. And what we know about our two main characters is that Ikuko is a traditional Japanese woman, and her husband is very um, sexually advanced or is very interested in exploring sexuality with his wife, and his wife is very sort of subdued, submissive, quiet, conservative. She doesn't want to do any of that. In particular, her husband has a foot fetish, and he would likes to take naked nude pictures of his wife, and she's not having any of it. But in reality, she is actually consumed with sexual desire. She just doesn't. She just can't let go or involve herself in the way that her husband wants, and he is incredibly frustrated about that. He cannot satisfy her. She is frustrated, and due to cultural boundaries or whatever, they just cannot communicate about it. So instead, they start engaging in this diary writing, and it becomes sort of an elaborate um, situation where they're both secretly writing in the diaries, but also leaving hints and clues for the other person, for their partner, to perhaps secretly read that diary, but none of them are going to admit to each other that they're even writing anything, and certainly not going to admit that they are secretly reading each other's diary entries. So they have this indirect sort of communication with each other about all of this through these diary entries. Ikoku's husband is, like I said, unable to really satisfy his wife. So he cooks up this scheme of involving a friend of the family indirectly into their love life, by bringing him in contact with his wife, going out for dinner, letting them spend time alone, which already there is sort of outside of the norm and frowned upon in this cultural context and this time and place. And he takes some secret naked pictures of his wife that he asked his friend to produce for him, thereby letting him, peek into some private pictures of his wife, getting him interested in her, and sort of this jealousy is then fueling his sexual vigor and his ability to perform. And meanwhile, his wife is having the fantasies about this younger, more handsome, more attractive, more tender lover, and then she's more able to enjoy herself. She loves her husband out of filial duty and obligation, but she's physically very repulsed by him. And this whole sort of juxtaposition between their true desires and their behavior and their lack of both communication to each other, but also the lack of acknowledging themselves, um, is sort of creating a lot of tension and a lot of weird situations. And this jealousy love triangle quickly spirals out of control. Consequences are different and more severe than any of them had imagined. And as you sort of progress through these diary entries, you also start realizing that perhaps the narrators are not truthful, because they're writing things knowing that their partner is going to read it. So it also becomes a game of manipulation. So you, the reader, have to sort of read between the lines and second guess to try to understand what is actually going on. It's a very entertaining novel. Like I did hint at, there are some borderline abuse situations or sexual assault and rape that you would certainly classify as that today. So do bear that in mind. But if you can look through that and not, at least not exclusively, view the novel through that lens, but look at it as an interesting narrative um, story and an interesting technique and an engaging plot, then I think you will enjoy this very much. So it's a short story, 130 pages. I read it in a day. It's very short, concise, direct prose, nothing too difficult. This particular one was translated by Howard Hibbert. Howard Hibbert. I don't know that translator. The other Tanizaki novels I've read has been translated by Edward Seigenstegger, who's brilliant. This one was also fine. So I don't know if there's more translations available than this one, but it's probably not that easy to find. So if you find any version of it, just go for that one. So Junichiro Tanizaki, The Key. I do recommend this one. Thank you.